So let me just get started here by saying, if you have ever had a narcissistic relationship, or especially if you have experienced narcissistic parents, in particular a mother, you guys are going to love this interview, and you have to get this book. So I am here with Brielle Nolen, who wrote this awesome book, Beyond the Broken Glass. It's all about your experience living with a narcissistic mother. And I just loved this book. And first, let's just talk about like how we actually know each other. So you and I worked together last year.
Yep, that is correct.
Brielle, welcome.
So good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you wanted to come on here and talk about this book and share your story, because I think it's so helpful when we talk about our own experiences. It's vulnerable to put yourself out there and to speak about the difficult things you've gone through. And at the same time, I have found it so helpful to hear other people's stories, to read them in my own healing process. So I think it's just amazing what you've done here. So let's talk about the beginning here. Like, what really inspired you to write this book?
I've known for a while I've wanted to write it, just because after I started dealing with my experiences and I started becoming more outspoken about them, I had so many people, friends, acquaintances alike, that would approach me and be like, I'm having something like this happening to me too, or my mother is saying or doing these things. And I always thought she was bipolar. I could never put a diagnosis on it. And just a lot of crazy making going on. And people were coming to me for advice all the time, like, how should I approach this? What should I do? And it really made me realize I wasn't as isolated in my experience with dealing with a narcissistic parent, which I originally thought. And I thought writing a book like this could really be a benefit to help other people by sharing my experiences, the resources that help me. It would really get the message out, because it seems like this is a more common occurrence than I would have ever thought possible.
Oh my gosh, it is. I feel like narcissism is like the it thing right now. It's all over the place. People are talking so much about it. And yeah, it's really so helpful to hear people's personal experiences so that we don't feel alone. And I have to say, like, I really did love this book, and it was tough to read at times, because what you went through with your mother in particular was just so heartbreaking. Some of the experiences you had with her, and also it was so inspirational. I just mentioned this to you a few minutes ago. The healing that you have gone through to get to the place where you are now it's just extraordinary. You went through so many incredibly difficult things. And yeah, I just love that you put this into book form.
Thank you so much. I'm just happy to share it with people. I just want it to help people. That was the whole reason, inspiration for writing it. I just want people to know, no matter how bad their circumstances, there's always hope. And I hope people can look at me and realize how much recovery I've done, and realize that's possible for them too, no matter what their circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's so crucial to continue to share not just the stories of what we've been through, but the stories of healing, like how we actually got to this place where we are now, where it's so much better. And I'm pretty sure, like, we haven't talked about it specifically, but it sounds like things are really, really much better for you now.
It's almost like I'm a totally different person now. If you would have asked me even 5 years ago, I would be this content, this happy with myself in my life, I probably would have laughed at you. Like, and that's just not possible. It's been years and years of therapy. Working with you as a health coach. It's just been a lot of inner healing and work. But I finally feel like I've gotten to the place in my life where I can say I've truly made it. And it's such a great feeling.
I'm so happy for you. Yeah. And let's dive into the book a little bit here, because one of the scenes that you talked about, or one of the things you experienced in this book, was when you actually broke your own arm to feel like you had a sense of control in your life, because your mother just did not let you have any. And so yeah, it was really striking to me, and also really like, whoa, like you must have been experiencing just like a tremendous sense of feeling trapped and not like you could control your own destiny. Can you just share a bit more about what that felt like growing up with a mother like that?
Honestly, growing up with a mother like that, the only way I can describe it is it felt like an actual prison. Um, Being a narcissist, it was always her way or the highway. There was never any talking her out of her opinion. You were never allowed to have your own opinion. If you did, you were punished for that if it was something she did not agree with. So growing up, that was one of the main points I dealt with throughout my childhood, and going into my adolescent years was that lack of control and me trying to find any way possible to get it. In childhood, as you had mentioned, I had broken my arm. My mom had wanted me to play the violin, and I did not want to play the violin. And so I literally would hit my elbow against the bedpost till I created a hairline fracture with my playing arm, so I wouldn't be able to play. But that was something that continued with me running away from home later in my childhood. And as I got into my adolescent years, developing an eating disorder, and also a lot of self-harm behaviors, because it just gave me my only sense of hope that this is something I control that she can't take away from me.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing that gave me comfort in that moment.
It's again incredible just what you went through. And you mentioned, the time when you ran away. I was reading it and I was like mad for you in the book, because you talked to a police officer and nothing happened. They actually called your mother, which
Yes.
was like, no, what are you doing?
I know. Honestly, that's how I felt too. The thing with my mom, and as a lot of people that have experienced narcissistic people in their life, is they know they are the master manipulator. My mom had mentioned, and I think I had said this in my book too, that she was so good at lying, even she believed her stories. I think that was probably the most profound and real thing she would ever admit to herself. But I remember her saying that and my blood just running cold. And she was. She could get in front of anyone, law enforcement, my father, other friends and family, and weave her story. And she was so good at portraying it that she would make it that no one would believe me. And growing up, it was always, I had some sort of issue, like I had a learning disability. So I was constantly going in and out of doctors, getting testing done. And obviously I was arguing with my sister. And so I was having behavioral issues, and I was having trouble forming bonds with people at school. So she painted this picture of I was this troubled child and that she was the victim. And her story was always, well, woe is me, woe is me. I'm dealing with all these issues and everyone should feel sorry for me. And it would kind of discredit as well anything I would say, because everyone would look at me as the problem child making up stories.
Yes. The things that you went through, I mean, they're all here in the book. And so if, again, I say, like, if you have had any sort of experience with someone narcissistic, especially a parent, you guys have to read this book, because I'm sure you can relate very much to what Brielle has gone through in her life. And I do want to mention now, because I think this is such an amazing thing that you have done. You are actually not in contact with your mother anymore. Is that still accurate?
That is still correct. I have not been in contact with her or my sister since 2012.
Wow. And I give you so much credit for doing that, because it's two things. It's so difficult for people to do that, to decide, you know what, like these relationships are so damaging to me. I'm going to separate myself, even though it's my family. That's huge. And I think the more that people talk about doing this, the easier it will get for people who need to do that in their own lives, to know that they're not alone and it's okay to do it. So I think what you've done is incredible for yourself.
Thank you so much. And I honestly can't agree more. I'm honestly, my biggest advice for anyone dealing with someone like that is that narcissistic and not willing to get help is you honestly have to sever the tie. And that was probably one of the most difficult things I had to do, because like anyone, you feel tremendous guilt.
Yeah.
And of course, as a society, we put mothers on the pedestal of they're very caring and nurturing. So when you're a child that says you don't want to have contact with your mother anymore, I get a lot of comments like, but she's your mother. You should love and forgive her no matter what. And people don't realize how damaging and traumatic these bonds can be, and how staying in a relationship with her made me more unhealthy. I could not establish or have a healthy relationship with her because she simply wouldn't allow it. So my advice is sever the bonds and don't be afraid to work with a therapist or a health coach that can help you work through those feelings of guilt that are bound to come up. And just know, because you're having those feelings of guilt, it's because you're a good person and you do care. But at the end of the day, you have to love yourself the most.
That's an amazing message. Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. And you detail in this book what that process was like for you and some of the things that your mother did after you decided to go no contact with her. So
yes, I will definitely say if you do go contact, please be prepared. And something my therapist told me as well, that things will absolutely get worse before they get better. Narcissists hate when they lose their narcissistic supply, when people no longer allow them to be controlled. And they will often try to retaliate that by victim blaming, by gaslighting, by accusing you, name calling. You know it, they do it. My mom did it to me. She did it for years. It was years that she tried, and it would get hard. I eventually got to the point where I just couldn't open her emails or text messages, because every time I read them, I knew it was going to make me upset. So it was something I didn't delete because I wanted to have that evidence in case I ever needed it, but I would basically print it out and I gave it to my father so I wouldn't see it.
Wow. That's a long time. And but that can be very typical of that type of dynamic.
It can. So don't give up. Narcissists, they don't give up, but don't give up either. Don't let them control you. Don't let them win. The way you let them win is by talking to them, by enabling them, by giving in. Honestly, the best way to deal with a narcissist is to ignore the behavior, because that's what they want. They want some type of response, whether it's negative or positive. You don't let them win by just refusing to give them any response.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. Yeah. That's it. That's how you do it. It's much easier said than done, as you know, but yeah.
It is much easier said than done. And that's why I said, don't be afraid to get help. There's no way I could have done it on my own. I wouldn't have had the strength myself to do it. And that's why it's so important, if you don't have those supportive people in your life, to find those supportive people through a therapist, a colleague, other support groups. They're definitely out there. So make sure you have a support system behind you.
100%. It makes it so much easier to have someone to help you through it.
It does.
And I wanted to talk about something else here. In the book, you talked about the eating disorder that you experienced, and you also experienced cutting. Like that was something that you used to cope with the abuse that you experienced. So I wanted to just give you the opportunity here, because you've been sharing such amazing wisdom here. Like what wisdom would you offer to someone who is going through either of those things in their life?
The first thing I would tell someone suffering from an eating disorder is it's never about the food. And that's something I hear from a lot of people is, well, why don't you just eat? You know? Right. But what I like to tell,
so easy.
It's not that easy. It's like anyone, we all have our different vices. Some people turn to drugs and alcohol to deal with their pain. I turned to food, and specifically controlling food as a way to give me a sense of control back. So the first thing I would tell anyone is, you're lying to yourself and hiding from your true feelings if you're saying it's about the food, because it's not. It's a mechanism you're using to hide from your real feelings. And that was something I was afraid to do. It was much easier for me to focus on food as the problem versus all the inner trauma I was facing. It was too scary for me to even fathom dealing and confronting that head on. So that became my vice. So if you're struggling with any type of addiction or eating disorder, please reach out, get professional help. And please acknowledge that there are inner traumas there and you can deal with that and it's not going to kill you. And that's always the parts, the fear of the unknown and the fear of, I feel like this is going to break me.
Yes.
But it's our addictions and our traumas that are lying to us. That's the thing that is slowly killing us. And we need to deal with the core if we're going to get better. And you don't have to do it alone.
That is incredibly profound what you mentioned there. That idea that we think that all of this stuff, addressing this pain, it's going to break us, or even it feels like it's going to kill us sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not true. It absolutely feels like that. And I often speak about it in my work from the spiritual perspective of like, yeah, that's your ego, or we could call it like your wounded inner child. There's lots of different names for it, or just an aspect of yourself. There's also this deep inner core that is indestructible when it comes to these emotional experiences. I can tell you from experience, I've also been through like an incredible amount of pain and fear. And every single time I thought it was going to break me, and it didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
I think that's the message we all need to get out is we all go through our different pains. Our ego tells us it's scary because it's unknown, but we have to face it and you won't break. I am physical proof of that. You are physical proof of that. We are still standing. We're stronger than ever, and you can be too.
I love it. Yeah. And it can feel so scary, like you said, to start to turn inward and address the subconscious stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do, because the subconscious stuff is usually where all the issues are.
It absolutely is. And that's what it was for me. I know we've had this discussion before, but therapy was very helpful because it was discussing a lot of the trauma, but your services really got deep into the subconscious, which was something therapy couldn't or didn't do for me. And that's when I found out, wow, I've been talking about all this stuff in therapy, but this is still an issue and I didn't even realize it. And I mean, I'll be honest, it's hard as hell. Yeah. I would walk away from some of those sessions a bawling mess because you bring all that stuff up and it hurts. It does cut you deep, but it's a sense of such relief when you can finally let it go. It's really an indescribable, such a powerful feeling to gain your own control and power back and do it in a healthy way.
I completely agree. It's the work of a lifetime, and it is incredibly difficult. I mentioned this recently in a live I was doing. They call it sometimes, like from the spiritual perspective, they call this like a spiritual warrior's journey because it's so hard, but it's absolutely worth it. Like you said, the feelings of relief that you feel once you release all of that stuff that you've been carrying around, it's huge. And you're right, you take your power back. Absolutely.
It is so true. It's hard, but anything worth having is working for. So I can't stress to you guys enough that are struggling through this. Just know you're not alone and you can take your control and power back. And it's okay to admit that it's hard and scary, and it's okay to feel those emotions.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I have another question for you, which is,
sure.
In your book, you do talk about your relationship experiences, your romantic relationship experiences, kind of like post and also while you were still in contact with your mother. So I'm curious, like, how do you feel like the relationship with your mother then affected your relationship choices later in life?
That's a very good question. I can definitely tell you at the time I was not aware of it. Since doing a lot of the inner work in the therapy and working with you, I have now come to realize it was my subconscious. I was subconsciously looking for partners that were in personality like my mother. Of course, this is not something I was aware of or doing consciously. None of us think I want to find a partner that's going to treat me like crap. No. But subconsciously, I was still looking for and craving a mother's love that I could never receive. And so I would pick partners that favored her in personality, thinking if I can earn their love, it'll make up for the fact that she couldn't love me. It'll make me feel better. And it was kind of like my inner child almost lying to themselves. Like I need to earn love because that's what I was taught. Love is not unconditional. It needs to be earned. And that's really what it became all about. I chose really bad toxic partners after toxic partners, looking for earning their love to fill a void.
Exactly. Yeah, you're definitely not alone in that experience. And it often takes some, like I could say for myself, it often took like some really bad relationships for me to actually turn inward and look at that subconscious stuff and go, oh yeah, crap, like that, this is what I've been doing. And that's uncomfortable to do. So I also give you a ton of credit for doing that work and really confronting some of that stuff, because it's not easy.
And it's not something that happened for me right away. Like I said, I always thought I experienced more emotional abuse. So whenever I'd hear of like women being physically abused, I'd always be one of those too. Like, well, I would never put up with that. And I always thought because I wasn't going through physical abuse, that somehow that made it okay, or it made it less than, and it really doesn't. Emotional, physical abuse, it's all just as bad.
Exactly. Yes, I completely agree. And I was similar too. I would say the same thing. Like, well, I would never be in a relationship like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I almost like my experiences were also not physical, but they were getting there. And
Yes.
yeah, it's, oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was just going to agree, because what I also want to tell people is don't try to lie to yourself and say just because you're in an emotionally abusive relationship and they're not hitting you, that it's okay. And I can tell you from my ex-husband, even though he was very emotionally abusive, he was also an alcoholic and had anger management problems. And it was also getting to the point where he was starting to get not necessarily physically aggressive on me, but it probably would have gotten there had I let it go on. So there's always that possibility of that happening. And why would you let it continue that long?
100%. Yeah. And I think, yeah, in these relationships, because the things that get us in there are so unconscious, to start to do that work, it does take a lot of courage to turn inward, because you're, like I said, you're going to see some stuff that initially isn't so comfortable, but it's the only way to break those patterns, to stop being unconsciously drawn to people who are like your parent, who, you know, it's crazy the games that our minds play with us subconsciously. And I wish that it wasn't this way, but this is what we end up being drawn to when we've experienced certain traumas in our childhood.
Yep, it's so true. And I just remember the first time my therapist told me, you have an addiction to toxic relationships. I'm like, what does that even mean? That's not a real addiction. That doesn't make sense. And why would I be addicted to people who treat me bad? Like, it didn't click in my mind until we started doing the subconscious work and I started going deep. And I'm like, it makes sense now that trying to heal that inner wound, trying to find the love my mother couldn't give me, it makes sense that I'm craving that.
Yes, exactly. And these dynamics can be so addictive, exactly as your therapist said, because of the toxic dynamic, because they're very often hot and cold relationships. One minute the person is super into you, the next minute they're cold or they're being critical. Whatever it is, it creates such an addictive experience.
It truly does. And I can vouch for that. Even when I started trying to, as I say, date healthy, I would feel like those people were boring almost. Yeah. I'm like, well, they're not boring people, but they feel boring to me. And that's when I realized it's not that they're boring people, it's that they're not emotionally abusive people. I'm so used to the ups and downs of being called names and then being treated well, that it's almost like I'm living on edge all the time. And when I'm taken off the ledge and on a more level base, it felt unnatural in many ways.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because that's often something that people don't talk about. There is a transition when it comes to going from toxic relationships to healthy relationships. It often feels weird in the beginning and boring, like you said. Internally, the experience of being with a healthy person is very different from a person who is toxic or abusive. And you can feel this sense of like, something's not right here, or like something's missing. It just, and you don't feel that usual subconscious pull that you have for the toxic partner. So it's definitely a transition. I'm glad you brought that up.
It is a transition, and I say that because I want people to know when they feel that starting this journey, that that's very normal and that's okay, and don't let yourself get discouraged by that feeling. It means you're getting healthy. And just keep in mind, for a lot of people, you probably haven't had healthy relationships up to this point in time. So it's basically trying to relearn a lot of patterns you've held on to for years. And you got to give yourself grace when that happens.
It is so true. It's so true. That's really what the journey of healing is. It's self-love, and it's accepting that this is hard, it's going to hurt. It's also going to be wonderful, and all of it is okay. All of it is okay and to be expected.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I do have one more question here.
Sure.
I'm curious to know, like, what are you now looking forward to experiencing? You've gone through so much healing. I know it's still continuing for you. What's next for you?
I like to say I'm finally experiencing life. Before, I was just surviving. It's been 30 years, and I feel like I can now say I've come into my own. I'm finally at the point in my life where I'm comfortable in my own skin. I'm starting to date again, but I'm doing it healthy. I'm not doing it like before, where I'm just jumping into a relationship right away just to be with someone, and I'm comfortable being by myself, which is a phenomenal feeling. I'm going back to school for my MBA, working in healthcare, so staying busy there, but I'm just enjoying life. I'm actually living it now, and it's such a profound feeling.
I love hearing that. I'm so happy for you. And I mentioned this to you before, like it's not too often that I get to hear from people like a year after we've worked together. And I love it because I always wonder, like I spend a lot of time with you guys, with my clients, and I wonder, I'm like, how are they doing? I'd love to hear. So it's so great for me to have you on here and to hear how much your life has changed and how well you're doing. So thank you.
I'm glad I can be here, and I'm glad you invited me. And I hope for anyone watching this that is just starting out on this journey and who was also as scared and afraid to do it as I was, that you can look at me and be like, okay, she's happy. Like, you guys can do it too. Happiness and truly living is available for everybody.
It is. And your journey is a testament to that. So again, I'm going to share this book. This is Beyond the Broken Glass. It's an amazing book. If you have had any sort of narcissistic experiences, especially if you've had a narcissistic parent and a narcissistic mother, this is a read that you're going to love. So thank you again, Brielle, for coming on here. I'm going to put the link to the book in the description here so you can check it out on Amazon. And thanks again.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Okay, bye, Brielle.
Bye. Thank you so much.